Hi everyone, welcome to the 6.0 new feature webinar. We're going to go through all the new features and updates that have been added to the 6.0 version of CLO. I'm going to begin by pointing out that we've updated the object browser to have icons. If you hover over the icon, the name will appear. Next, I'm going to go over the update to the DXF import window. All of the import settings are the same. We have just consolidated some of the information into drop-down menus. So here I'll just show a side-by-side of the 5.2 window versus the 6.0 so you can see the difference. So this is for importing a pattern, but if you're exporting a pattern, the DXF export window has changed as well. If you go to File, Export DXF, choose a saving location and name, the options here have been consolidated also. There is an additional option that has been added here called Export Pattern Bounding Box. This feature is really meant to aid in users who would like to export their pattern pieces and then apply their prints or texture mapping in Photoshop or Illustrator. So if you select single bounding box, you will have a box around every single pattern piece when you open the DXF in another program. And if you select separate pattern bounding box, you will have one giant bounding box around the entire set of patterns. So I have exported this dress shirt with both options as the separate bounding box and as the single bounding box, just to show you what it looks like. So here, if you choose separate, you will have a bounding box around every single pattern piece. And you can even see that the layout is exactly the same as we exported it from the 2D window. And then if I select the single example where it puts a single bounding box around all the patterns, this is what that is going to look like. So that concludes the DXF export updates. Here's a review of how to set up and use the UV editor mode options that are added to the 6.0 version of CLO. Before moving into the UV mode, it will help if you set up your patterns in a layout that is almost a square. So when you select it, you can see generally a square shape because the UV mode layout is based on squares. Some of the UV editor options will adopt the layout that has been set up here. So let's move into that mode. Here you can move to simulation and choose UV mode. So when you first move into the window, the pattern pieces are going to be scattered around randomly. And you will also have UVs for your trims. The first process we'll go through is fitting all of these pieces into the very first UV block. So if you right-click in the 2D background, you will find Reset UV to 2D Arrangement. When you click on that, it's going to shrink all of your patterns down and also arrange them into that layout that you had developed in the 2D window. Then it'll be easier to resize these pieces to all fit within this first UV. All of the trim UVs will be available as well, and they'll end up in the corner when you select this reset option. So here I'm just going to pull them out because I really want to take them and place them into any of the remaining areas that I have in my UV map area. So now I'm going to move these trim pieces to some of the spare surrounding areas around my UV layout. Then you can right-click in the 2D background and select Fit All UV to 0 through 1. This dialog will appear and ask us how we would like to do this. So the default is set to length, and this is essentially a type of padding or buffer space around the edge of the UV. We can do this by length, actually using millimeters, or you can use relativity to the UV coordinate. So switching to this UV coordinate option will give you a different scale of 0 to 1 that you can adjust up or down to change the amount of space away from the UV edges. And you can hit OK to confirm that size. Then I'm just going to show you that here you have a toggle menu to preview all of the maps and the mesh before you export them. And then next I'm going to show UV snapshot. If you click on this icon, this dialog will appear. First, you want to click Saving Path to choose the file saving location and choose a file name. The size here is the pixel size, so it's at 2K by default. And if you wanted this to be 4K, you would double it to 4096. Turning on anti-alias will help smooth the lines that are exported. And then you can also change the color of the mesh that will result in your snapshot. So I'm going to leave the UV area setting at 0 to 1 because previously I had asked all of my pieces to fit into the 0 to 1 UV. Then I will hit save and the snapshot will process. So now I've generated that snapshot and you can see here that the wire color is blue and my layout matches everything that I've created. Next, I'm going to review the Bake Textures function. So directly below UV Snapshot, we have Bake Textures. If you left click on this, a similar dialog to UV window will open that just has some slightly different options. Like the UV Snapshot, first you're going to choose your saving location and your file name, and you can adjust the pixel size and select which UV area you are exporting. At the lower part of this dialog, you can see all of the texture options that you might have. If you don't need one of the maps, you can uncheck that section and it won't export. The area called Fill Texture Seams, it will make a little bit of the given texture on each piece kind of bleed out over the edge of the actual pattern shape. So when you bring it into the another 3D program, those edges will spill over a little bit so you won't accidentally have any empty spaces or any gaps at your edges. That's why this is in pixels, because it's really adding a couple pixels to all the edges of your shapes. It's also why you see almost no change happening in your window when you adjust this. It's really just adding a very few amount of pixels around the edges of the patterns. Then you can hit save to export any of the maps that you have selected. Then I'm just going to open up my export to show you what I have. I have a diffuse map, a metalness map, a normal map, and a roughness map. Next, I'm going to go through another way that you might want to use the UV snapshot, and that would be by utilizing more than one UV coordinate. I'm going to take my patterns and enlarge them, and I'm going to distribute one or a few pattern pieces amongst every single UV. A really important aspect is that you don't want any of your pattern pieces crossing over the UV lines. You want them always contained within a box. The reason why you might want to use multiple UVs with maybe a single or a few pieces in it is that every single piece by itself will then be 4K. So you will have a much better resolution for your texture maps when you apply them to other parts in another 3D software. When they're shrunk and all of the pattern pieces are in one UV, their resolution is relative to the size within that UV map. So if they each get their own UV map, their resolution will be better. So then you can use UV Snapshot or you can use Bake Textures. I'm going to click on Bake Textures, and again I'll choose my saving location and give it a default file name. And in this case I'm going to increase my resolution. So I'm going to make this 4K. I'll only have a few maps selected. And I'm going to choose all tiles. So when you select all tiles, it's going to export any UV square that has something inside of it. So the more maps and the more images or UV boxes that you use, the longer the saving will take. But here I'll open up what I've exported. And here you can see all the different map exports. So that concludes the UV map editor. Here I'm going to go through grade review mode. This mode will allow you to review a full size run with a graded pattern. Before I begin, I would like to point out that I am starting with a graded pattern, and I also have a graded graphic applied. You can use this mode both with a single garment or an outfit. I'm going to begin by clicking on the Grade tab in my object browser. As you can see, there's a size table for each garment. To begin the grade review process, you are going to select the Pair Avatar tab. Initially, when you select Pair Avatar, it will be blank. Once you click Update, the window will populate a list to allow you to pair an avatar with each size. I would also like to draw your attention to how it pairs up each size table. It is going to match up 1 to 1. So the first size of the shirt will be paired with the first size of the skirt. You can see this here. It says small 4 medium 8, and so on. This is how the pair avatar will work if you have multiple size tables. If you want to have your sizes match up, they have to be in the same location on the list. The next very important step is to pair the appropriate sized avatar with each size. This file was built using a size 4 avatar. And even though you can see the avatar on your starting size, you still must go through the process of pairing your avatar or 3D form for the initial size that you begin with. So here you can click on Pair Avatar and import your avatar through a folder. I have saved out each size as its own avatar file to use. I'm going to select my size 4 avatar to pair with my size 4 outfit. In order to capture this image and see it in the grade review mode, you must click on this icon called Save 3D State Review Mode Only. So I'm going to select that icon and quickly move into the grade review mode to show you that as a result of clicking Save 3D State, I can now see my avatar and my garment. I have not selected 3D State for the other avatars, which is why they cannot be seen yet. I'm going to switch back to simulation mode and complete the process. A good workflow will be to select your size first. You will see your garment enlarge. Then select Pair Avatar and pair the next corresponding size. You then have the option to select Redrape or Simulate. What's nice about the Redrape feature is that it will automatically resimulate that size into its finished state. I will select 3D State and save that into grade review mode. And then I'm going to repeat this process for the last two sizes. So I'm going to switch to the size 12, pair my new avatar, and then select Redrape. And then I will select 3D State. Just to show you, I have selected 3D State for size 4, 8, and 12. I am going to move to grade review mode to show this. And here you can see those are the sizes we have available so far. So now I can just finish my last size. Select size 16, pair it with the appropriate avatar, and for this size, I'm actually going to simulate my garment. First, I'm going to layer my skirt and then simulate. Once the garment has finished simulating and adjusting, I can remove the layer and I can turn simulation off. And once I click on Save as 3D State, this image will populate into my grade review mode. And now I can see my full size run. I can review my size run in a few different ways. First, I can move my avatars around in unison or individually. If I wish to only move one size, I would select the lock button to unlink the rotation, allowing me to move each window on its own. To go back to moving them together, just reselect the lock button. You can also adjust the size of these images by changing the pixel number. So from here, I'm going to change the width to 600. And you will see the images wrapping around. You can also change this layout. You can change the layout to horizontal or vertical. You can also reset to the original layout by selecting this reset icon. And you can view this in full screen as well. If you wish to get out of full screen, simply hit Escape on your keyboard. I can also save all of these images by selecting the Save icon. And CLO will prompt you to choose a folder location to save your images. Once I have named it, I then have the option of saving with a transparent background and to save separate images. If you don't select Save Separate Images, all of your images will be compiled together in one long image. And here you can actually see the snapshot I made of all of my graded sizes. You can then easily go back to simulation mode and continue to edit. So that concludes the demo for grade review mode. Next, I'm going to go through the nesting process and the features that have been added there. Nesting is a function that was added during one of the 5.2 patch releases, but I'm going to go through the process here and also show the features that were added for 6.0. So first I'm going to point out that I'm using a graded pattern that has several sizes. You can do this process whether your pattern is graded or not, but one of the features allows you to lay out various sizes, so I'm going to show it with that setup. So you're going to move into print layout mode, and your pattern pieces might be scattered around initially. You can right-click in the background and choose Reset to Default Arrangement, and the pieces will arrange a little neater. I'm just going to change the width of my fabric roll. Then you can right-click in the background of Print Layout mode and choose Nest All Patterns. So first we have number of garment. So this is the amount of duplicates that you would like to lay out. The next area is buffer spacing. This is going to add a little bit of space in between your pattern pieces so they are not touching directly. Here I'm going to type in 0.375 so I have a little 3/8 inch buffer spacing between my patterns. I'm going to check on Nest All Graded Sizes. So what that's going to do is lay out 2 garments for every size that I have. Then you can click Proceed and the process will begin. This can take some time. Basically, the more sizes and the more garments that you ask for, the longer the process is going to take. This section has been sped up for the purpose of the demonstration. So when the process is done, the dialog will return to this original state. So I'm going to hit close, and then I'm just going to zoom in and show you that that buffer space has been built in. So you can see all the pattern pieces laid out on one giant area. The pieces that are the original pieces show with the texture image, and all of the duplicates will show as an outline. So this is an actual size image. If you would like to save this and actually print this out, you can click on this Save Image button. It's going to open you up to 2D Snapshot, and there you can make the preset 1:1. Then you can hit Save, and it's going to prompt you to choose a saving location and name your file. And then it's going to save this as a PNG file. So I'm just going to open that PNG file back up and zoom in a little bit to show you that this is an actual size. The image is processing as I open it, but you can send this to a printer or a plotter and print this out. One thing I want to caution you against is that this nesting is only going to live in this file while it's open. If I save the file and then I close it, when I reopen it, the nesting is going to be removed. So if you intend to actually use this to print this out, save your image directly after you've done the nesting, because it won't be there if you close the file and reopen it. So that concludes the updates to nesting. Next, I'm going to go over the updates to colorway mode. The first thing I want to point out is just an update to the grouping of materials. So here on the left, you can see there is a title for fabric. We have graphics, top stitches, and if there were buttons or trims, that would also be there. They are grouped into these sections that are divided by a line. To show the next point, I'm just going to enlarge the view of each column so it's spilling over past my viewable area. Now when you do this, the scroll bar at the bottom will appear, but these sections on the left-hand side are fixed. So you can see as I'm moving, the titles don't move, so you can still see what category you're working with. So you'll only really have this option when the columns are enlarged. I'm going to reduce this size again for the remainder of the demo. The next set of features I'm going to go over is in regards to selection. So now if you right-click on one of these chips, you will find Select All with Same Color. So if I click on this, it's going to select everything that has that color applied. And I'm going to scroll down to the bottom, and you can see that the top stitches actually share the same color. Even though they're in a different section, that area will also select. So it really is a select all of the same color that's applied to any part within the colorway or parts from other colorways. So if the same color is within some different colorways, that will select as well. The next part for selection is an option to hold Shift and move from left to right to select entire areas quickly. So the selection really reads from left to right, not from top to bottom. And to demonstrate, I'll just select a top chip. I'll hold shift and move to the bottom. It will select downward, but if you start moving over to the right-hand side, it's going to deselect that stuff. So it really selects from left over to right. You can select one corner and then select the last corner. It will select everything that's in there. And if you hold the control key down and click back on some of these chips, it will deselect only those color chips. You can also do a mix of holding shift and then switching to the control key to add areas into your selection group. And then one of the last pieces of the colorway update is built into the Save Image option. Now when you click on this, you can select 3D window or colorway editor, and colorway editor is really the new part. So I'm going to select this and hit OK. The default file type will be a PNG, and you will be asked to choose a saving location and give this a file name. And then I've just opened this file to show you the result. Now you can use that PNG wherever you like. And that concludes the updates for colorway mode. I'm going to go over an update for Alvenon form users. Here I have an Alvenon form with a garment, and what is currently in the space is this AVAC file. That's the Alvenon file. Now you can get an AVACP file that is essentially a pose file for your Alvenon form. So you can just double click on that or drag and drop it into the workspace, and you'll be able to change poses of your Alvenon form. The AVACP file will be created and given to you by Alvenon, but now they can be used directly in CLO. Here I'm going to go over an update to the Avatar Measure tools, and this is a set of tools in the 3D window that are located here. I'm working with the tools ungrouped so you can see all of them. And there used to be a set of tools called Avatar Tape, and the functionality for that tool has been nestled into this set of tools. I'm going to quickly show a comparison of the 5.2 3D toolbar to the 6.0 3D toolbar and just point out the old set of tools. This set of tools was called Avatar Tape, and you had attached to Avatar Tape, so you could attach fabric to this tape that you put on your avatar. And that functionality has been just grouped into the set of tools now called Avatar Measure. And I'm going to quickly just go through the functionality of these tools. First, I'm going to fix my pant to a tape measure mark I put around the waist. I'm going to begin by hiding the top that she's wearing. So now I'm going to move into my 3D window, and I'm going to open up that window a little bit wider so I can see the full set of tools. And I'm going to use the surface circumference measure to give myself a marking around the hip waist area and attach the waist to that marking. I'm going to start by getting a really good dead center view. To put any circumference tape down, it requires 3 clicks to complete. Your first click is your initial starting point, and while you're moving, you can hold shift and you'll see this guideline on the avatar's body. The second click is then going to start creating the circumference, and then I can release shift. Now you can see that moving as I start rotating around the avatar, and I can move to the center back, and with a third left click, I can put that tape down. Then I'm going to switch to Attach to Measure. With the Attach to Measure tool, you have to click on every edge of the pattern and attach it to the tape. So I'm going to left click on the waistband, then click on the tape until I've attached every edge, and I see that every edge is showing red. Now if I hit spacebar to simulate, the waistband is going to move and attach to the marking. So I'm going to turn simulation off, and now the waistband is fixed to my marking. So I'm going to now demonstrate the difference between the basic circumference and the surface circumference by putting some markings down at the bust area. I'm going to left click to start and move to the other apex point and left click there, and then I'll have my circumference moving around my avatar. And then I can move to the back and do a third click to place that line down. So you see how this is measuring straight across and not following the surface of the avatar? The basic one will measure around like a tape measure. So now I'm going to switch to the surface circumference measure and do the same action in the same area. You'll notice that this version follows all the curvature of the avatar. So if I rotate my view, you'll see that it's following the bust. And you can attach fabric to both of these markings. To delete the markings from your avatar, simply move to the Edit Measure tool, and you can left click and hit delete on your keyboard, or you can right click and choose delete from the right click menu. So next I'm going to go through the basic tape measure and the surface tape measure. So the basic tape measure, I'll demonstrate that again over the front of the body. It's just going to graze the body like a tape measure would, and it's not going to follow the curvature. If I switch to the tool directly below, surface tape measure, this will follow the curvature of the body. I'm going to use the surface tape measure also to draw a underbust marking just to demonstrate a point. As you're moving and following these shapes, you want to left click and place some anchor points as you're moving. If you make a mistake while you're moving, you can hit the backspace key on your keyboard and it will remove one point step at a time, almost like an undo option while you're still in the action of the feature. And to end that line, you can double click. Next, I'm going to review the linear measure. So the linear measure basically measures straight through the avatar. Say I wanted to determine a neck width that I want to use for a pattern. I can go here and left click where I want it to start, move straight across, and then double click to end. And if I move around the avatar, you'll see kind of how that measured. While the first click and the last click do touch the surface of the avatar, it doesn't follow the surface and it measures straight through in space. And I'll just demonstrate this one more time to measure the seat depth, or kind of like the hip depth from front to back. So you can see how it's touching the surface but measuring straight through the avatar's depth. And now I'm going to move to the height measure tool. So to use this tool, I'm going to bring my garment back, and to just move around and show you what it's doing. It measures from the floor to any surface on the avatar, following where my cursor is. So I'll demonstrate this by measuring the inseam height from the floor. I can see that straight up from the floor measures 29.967 inches to where it's hitting on my garment. So the last aspect that I'll show is how to detach things from your avatar tape. So previously I had attached my pant. And using the Edit Measure tool, if you right click on that area, you will find Detach from Avatar Measure or Detach All from Avatar Measure. So in order to disconnect the entire pant in one action, I'm going to click Detach All, because if I click just Detach from Avatar Measure, it's only going to get rid of that one connection on this one garment panel. My back is still connected. So when you have multiple pieces attached, you're going to want to right click and use Detach All from Measure, and it's going to remove everything in one action. And then I'll just simulate to show that this has detached from the tape and it now can be pulled away or will sink down. So that concludes the demo for the avatar measure update. Next, we're going to go through the addition of arrangement points to the 3D shapes that come with our library. So these are designed for creating bags, and I'm just going to go through their setup a little bit. So all of them have arrangement points for general areas around the shape, like the front, side, back, bottom, but they also have arrangement points for straps. So one way to understand what direction your pieces are going to go in is by looking at what the bounding volume shapes look like. I'm going to turn on my bounding volumes, and the arrangement points are attached to these, and when you attach fabric to them, they wrap around these cylindrical shapes. So understanding this concept is going to really help me be in control of what's happening, especially when you're dealing with a lot of bag pattern pieces that may be similar in shape. I'm going to open a file that has a pattern already placed into it. So I'm going to turn my arrangement points on and quickly arrange these pieces around the main 3D shape. So I have the main body arranged, and now I'm going to go through the straps. So I have a strap that's going to act as a very long strap that I want to go across and connect to the sides, and then I have these little straps that I want to go from the front to the back. The way that pieces react when placed on an arrangement point also has something to do with their orientation in the 2D window. So if I turn on my bounding volumes here, I can actually see that this is not following the bounding volume in the direction that I would like it to. If this occurs, simply try rotating your pieces and resetting their 2D arrangement, and then they will follow the opposite direction of the bounding volume. So I turn my strap so it can follow this arrangement point in this bounding volume, and I'm going to get the same result from these smaller pieces. Here I can see the preview of what the shape will end up like, and I want it to actually go in the opposite direction. So I'm going to take a moment and rotate these pieces and then reset their 2D arrangement. Now that they're in this position, when I select them, they're going to follow the direction that I need. You don't need to have the bounding volumes on to do this at all. I just had them on so you can really see what that shape is relating to. So one last thing I want to point out is the addition of a cube shape to the bounding volume options. So here I've turned my bounding volumes on. I'm just going to move one of the shapes out that's a cube. You can make these shapes by going to Avatar, Avatar Editor, clicking on Arrangement. Here's a little plus sign to add a bounding volume. So the bounding volume starts out as a cylinder. That's the default. But here under Shape, you can change this to Cube. And then you can adjust the remaining measurements as you need. And that concludes the update for the 3D shape arrangement points and the option of a cube-shaped bounding volume. In 6.0, we have updated the function of auto-convert to avatar. It works a lot better now, and it has a lot of additional features. So here, you can move to avatar, and you will find auto-convert to avatar. When you click on this will allow you to take an OBJ or an FBX created in another software and convert it into a file that can be rigged and have some other editable options. A dialog is going to open up. In the right-hand corner, there is an Open button where you can access and import your OBJ or FBX, and it imports into the workspace. The first step is to select the appropriate gender, and then we have 3 options here on the left that will result in different outputs. So the first version, called CLO Skin Style, is going to borrow the skin and the head detail from the CLO avatars, and it's also going to take the skeleton or the rigging. So in this case, you will be able to pose your file and change skin style and hair, but the size editor is not compatible with this version, so you won't be able to change the size of your body. So the second version, called Rigging Only, is going to keep your original skin style and your original body shape, but it's going to rig that avatar. So it will be your original file, but you can pose it. And the third version is Size Editable. This one will keep your original skin style, but the body shape is going to be converted to that of a CLO avatar. And in this case, it will be compatible with rigging and compatible with the size editor. You can actually check all 3 of them on while you're doing the converting process. And then here you're going to choose a saving location and give it a file name. And then click the Convert button to start the process. So the conversion process takes some time. This has been sped up for the process of the demo. When it's completed, this dialog will appear and you can click Open the folder or Close. It has also saved 3 separate files for me in that folder location that I choose before I hit Convert. So here on the left we have the CLO Skin Style version. And in the middle is the Rigging Only. And on the right, we have Size Editable. And here I'll turn on Show X-Ray Joints, so you can see that they all have the rigging. And then I'm going to move to the Avatar Editor, and you can see that this opens on the Size Editable version, because that's the only one you can change. Here we have Size Editable, but if you switch to Rigging Only or the CLO Skin Style, both of these are not going to work with the editor. The advantage also of the size editable version is that you can use that version with the ASTM size files that are provided with CLO. So here you can go into a folder and jump through our different sizes, but it's going to look like your avatar's skin and head. So that concludes the avatar editor updates. Next, I'm going to go through the update for integration with ANF files and with substance files. So both of the integrations are a little bit different. So first, I'm going to begin with the ANF file type, and that integration is really similar to our integration with XText files that we have currently. You can take an ANF file and drag and drop it on your fabric, and it will import the texture and any maps that are built into that ANF file. And also another way you can import these files is by right-clicking and choosing Import. And in this case, you'll just navigate to the folder, and you'll have to choose the appropriate ANF file. So now you can use those files directly. The next option I'm going to go over is the substance integration. With the substance integration, we actually now have a substance folder with some default substance files built into the CLO library. If you don't have these, you just might have to download those new assets. So you can see the substance files with the logo, and you can also simply drag and drop them onto your fabric here. The property editor with substance files is going to be a little bit more complex. They will come with a preset, which is something that will be determined through the substance file itself. So this file was made with a few different presets that I can switch between. So I'm going to add these specific substance files because I want to show you that in the property editor, you're going to now have properties that are actually adopted from substance. So this substance file doesn't have any presets built in, but I wanted to use it to show you that there's an area called advanced parameters, and all of these properties are pulled from the substance file. So depending on what was built in that particular file is what will result in the options that you have here. So here I'll just demonstrate changing some of those properties. If there are color channels in your substance file, you will also be able to access them here. So the next detail about substance files that I want to point out is how they interact with colorway mode. So here I've opened colorway mode and I have made a second colorway, and you can really just drag and drop or use brand new substance files on your fabric. You can also just change properties from within an existing substance file, or you can change through presets that are built into it. So I'll just add an additional colorway and then bring in a new substance file that has presets built into it and jump through those presets. You can also choose to mix substance files and regular texture files or whatever you please. And then the last detail I'll show is that there are two links to bring you to the Substance source page or to simply learn more about Substance. Substance source has hundreds of fabrics that you can download and use now directly in CLO. And that concludes the new texture integrations. Now I'm going to show the add print function. In the object browser to the right, there's this new add print button. If you left click on it, a window will pop up where you can import a texture file. This is a PNG file that has transparency and is a seamless texture repeat, and it will be added as a print layer. You can always only add one print layer, and you can see here in the property editor that it has its own section. You can switch it out through here, or there is a delete button which will remove the layer. So here I'm just going to select a different image and place that down. Now I'm going to place a separate untiled graphic and show you the different tiling options that are built into this feature. So this is special to this feature. So here you have the option to change to brick with a horizontal offset or half drop with a vertical offset. You can also apply the material types to this layer separately. So here I've added a metal type, and then I'm also going to place a normal map. So you have all the same map areas that come with the properties of a texture image. And the last important detail about this is how to resize this. So to resize this layer, you must do it through the texture transformation section. So here I can adjust the size of my image without affecting the base texture layer. And that concludes the demo for Add Print. Next, I'm going to go through the addition of something called Multi-Texture Editor. So you recently saw this option called Add Print, and I just want to point out that Multi-Texture Editor is very separate from this function called Add Print. It's a function that lets you design prints directly in CLO with a few additional options. So the way that you access Multi-Texture Editor is by clicking on your fabric, and in the property editor next to texture, there's this little paintbrush icon. If you left click on this window will open up. You can open up these windows and move your dividing areas apart, and you are able to zoom in and out and pan around your window here, same as you can in the 2D and 3D windows. So these yellow lines are your canvas that you have to work within, and one of the controls you have is through the preview settings here. So you can choose to turn the grid off and adjust the opacity of the preview around it. And as you can see, whatever you create here will repeat infinitely on your texture. So the first thing to be really aware of is the actual canvas size is shown here at the top. I can change my unit to inches, and it shows me the size of my canvas. This size is directly adopted from the initial texture image that was there when I opened up the editor. If I select this layer, you can see the size of this image at the bottom matches my canvas size. So I just want to demonstrate that changing the canvas size from up here is not going to adjust your texture images that are all within it. So for example, if I go here and I type in 13 by 13, you can see that now I have a space around my image because my texture image here is only 10 by 10. And you can see that reflected here in the repeat. If I click on this layer and also make it 13 by 13, it will adjust to match the entire canvas size. I can also make this larger than the canvas, and it will get cut off but repeated. Here that dotted line is showing me my actual size, but I know that the canvas is stopping this here. So with the base texture images, you often want to make sure that they are going to match the canvas size that you're working with. And you won't have to think about it too much because if you have a texture image applied, the canvas size will automatically adopt that initial size. So then that's a good reason for me to point out that each layer comes with a locking mechanism. So if I click the lock button here, when you lock it, all of the options will be grayed out and nothing can be clicked on. So now I'm going to start using the layering options. I have some images here that I'm going to use, and an easy way to apply them is to drag and drop them into this layers panel. So here this layer that I added will place on top, and I can actually immediately tell that it's not matching my canvas size. This layer is a clean, repeated graphic, so I'm going to link my proportions and adjust the size here to match my canvas. And you can also use Add Layer to import an image manually. I'm going to close my library and zoom in so we can see the print as it develops. So for individual layers, you can move them around, and you can use this tool to rotate them and resize them. I'm going to place this graphic here, and you can also make a copy of your existing layers, as well as rename them. I'm going to edit this copy, and I'm going to drag it here over to the corner. You can see that this graphic gets cut off by my canvas, and I can see that shown in my repeat. One of the options is extend to other side. So when you turn this on, you can see it will allow that area to repeat over and show here on your canvas. I'm going to add one more layer and freehand resize this until the seams match up. You can reorder layers by dragging and dropping them. And you can also desaturate and recolor an individual layer as well. You can also turn on this tiling option to have your image repeat. And adjusting the opacity per layer is also an option. One of the special parts about the multi-texture editor is the blending options. I'm going to zoom in on this flower, and you can see that you can't really see the texture through the graphics. On the stripes you can because we've adjusted the opacity, but for these layers you still can't. There are a lot of blending options. I'm just going to show a couple of them, but I'm going to choose multiply, and you can see how that blends into the layers. This will blend with every single layer that's below it. You cannot choose to blend it with only individual or secluded layers. And using this graphic, I'll just jump through some of the different options. The transformation section is all connected to this scaling and rotating tool. So here, if I move this around, you can see that the position's changing. So this just allows you to change this manually with coordinates, and the size as well, and the angle as well. These all come with a reset button. And here you can see it's reverted this layer. So when you're done working with this editor mode, you do have to hit the apply button in order to completely save your changes. The nice thing is, if you forget to do that, CLO is going to tell you that the changes have not been applied and ask you if you want to apply the texture. Clicking yes here is the same as clicking the apply button. I'll hit yes, and then the editor mode will close. Another thing to be aware of is that it's going to generate one full diffuse map image. So here, this is actually a PNG image of my compiled layers. So if you do create a print, you will have access to the compiled image as a texture image. You can always click on the editor to access your layers and keep editing. So there's one last important detail that you should know. If you're using this texture editor with fabrics that already have several different maps applied. So I'm going to exit the texture editor just to show you. If I scroll down to the transformation section, my texture image is that 13 by 13 size that I chose, but the normal map and the displacement map are not. They're that original size that I had with my texture image. So I really should update these to match in this case, but you can prevent this from happening if you don't really change the canvas size or the initial base texture size when you start with one on your fabric. So the next question is, how does this new feature interact with colorway mode? It is definitely compatible with colorway mode. So here I've moved into colorway mode and I'm going to add an additional colorway. And then you can select your fabric. Then you can access the multi-texture editor to update the print for that version. You can delete some or all of the layers that you may have used initially, and you can bring in entirely new images. Everything can be different from this version, to the canvas size and the texture. This still is strictly colorway and printway mode. It is not going to change the physics of the fabric. So here I'll go through the process of designing an entirely new print. And at the end, you simply have to hit apply. Once that's applied, you can close the texture editor and colorway mode may still be open. And you can hit update to see your change there. And here under texture, you'll be able to access the diffuse map for that specific colorway. So that concludes the demo for the multi-texture editor. Let's look at what feature has been added to the Edit Texture tool. To start the demo, I'm going to add a texture image to my fabric. Then I'm going to switch to the Edit Texture tool. Now, by default, when you use this scaling option, it changes both sides. You can select the fabric in the object browser and you'll find a tab for back. You can uncheck Use Same Material as Front. And then here in the 2D window, I'm going to switch to the back side of my texture. And the Scale tool will resize the back texture or the front texture independently. So here you can see only the back side is adjusting. And we have the tool in the 3D window also. So I can select the front or the back, and it will change those textures independently. So that concludes the update to the Edit Texture tool, being able to edit the front and back of the fabric separately. I'm going to go over the updates to the graphic features. I'm going to begin by adding a graphic to the front of my shirt and placing this down at its original size. So you can see that the graphic starts out small, and I'm going to go ahead and resize this graphic image. There has been an addition to the right-click features of the Edit Graphic tool. If you right-click now, you will find Revert to Original Size, and your image will return to the original source file size. Just a little furthermore, if you resize your graphic, and you also tile this, I'm going to choose Tile Pattern. If you've gone through these actions and you right-click and choose Revert to Original Size, it is not going to remove the tiling. In this case, you can right-click and choose Tile, Remove Tile here from the right-click features, or we've also added Tile into the graphic properties. So here I have my graphic selected, and in the property editor, I'm going to scroll down to the graphic configuration area, and here we have Tile. You can choose this drop-down menu and change the direction, or choose None to remove your tiling as well. So next I'm going to show graphic over seam line. To demonstrate a point about this, I'm going to place my graphic down in 2 locations. And I'm going to begin by moving the graphic over the seam line. In order for this feature to work, the seam must be sewn together. And once you move the graphic, you're not going to immediately see anything happen. You need to select the graphic, and in the property editor, you will find Over Seam Line. Check this function on, and then the graphic will appear on the other pattern piece. There might be occasions when you move your graphic and turn this function on, and you don't immediately see it appear on the other pattern piece. I want to explain why this happens. There's a property of the Over Seam Line function called the tolerance, and here the default number is 0.02. What that means is that any sewing relationship that has a difference bigger than 0.02 of an inch is not going to show the over seam line function. So I can check what the difference of my seam line is by switching to the Edit Sewing tool and selecting or hovering over that seam line. I'll switch to Monochrome Surface just so you can see really clearly. If I hover over this front seam, it's showing me that there is a difference of 0.07. 0.07 is larger than the 0.02 default tolerance that we have. So I have 2 options here. I can either adjust the pattern so the seam lines match, or I can increase the tolerance of the over seam line function so it allows the graphic to show on the other pattern piece. To 0.08, I'm going to change my tolerance to 0.08, and then we see that graphic appear. This feature is built in as a safety net to prevent users from putting graphics over areas that have too large of a difference. So they have to adjust or override that setting to go above that tolerance. So that concludes the updates for graphics. Next, we're going to go through a property called Z offset, which has been added to the top stitch properties and the graphic properties. So before I apply my top stitch, I'm going to demonstrate why you might want to use this property. I'm going to select my graphic, and the graphic has a displacement map applied to it. If I open up my displacement map settings, I have a displacement height of 4 millimeters with a shift of -1, which means I have 3 millimeters of displacement height showing on my graphic. I'm going to open up the render preview window. So here you can see the visual thickness of the graphic. I'm going to close the render window and apply a top stitch to an internal line that is following the shape of my graphic. So here you can see in the 3D preview window, it looks like the top stitch is on top of the graphic. But if we switch to the render preview and update our window, you will see that the top stitch is actually below the graphic and we can't see it. So if I go back to the 2D window and I select all of my top stitches, there's now an area for Z offset. So I know my graphic has 3 millimeters of height. I'm going to type in the same amount of 3 millimeters and then switch to the render window to see what that looks like. So now you can see that top stitch is moved to the surface because it's been offset from the pattern. Now I'm going to close out of the render window and I'm going to demonstrate how Z offset works on a graphic on the back of this garment. So here I have a graphic placed and I'm going to select it just to point out that this graphic has no displacement map. So it has no extra thickness to it and it's going to be very flat. I'm going to take the same top stitch and I'm going to apply this over the internal lines that are nearby the graphic. I'll switch to the render window so you can see what that looks like. And we can see that that top stitch is on top of that graphic. So if I would like to have the graphic be over the top stitch, I can now select the graphic, and the property of Z offset is also built into the graphic properties. So this is 0.1 of a millimeter, which is very small. I'm going to change this to just 1 millimeter, and you'll quickly see that that rises above the graphic. So just to demonstrate on a more drastic level, what that actually does is physically raises the graphic off of the surface of the fabric. If I demonstrate this by typing 10 millimeters, you can see very clearly that this is raised very high. So using this setting in very small measurements, like 1 millimeter or even possibly 0.5, will allow you to layer things, will give you better control of layering your images. I'll switch to the render preview, and we can see that that graphic is above the top stitch now. So those are the two places where Z offset has been added. Next, I'm going to go through a feature called auto sewing, which is actually a really amazing feature. When using the auto sewing function, it's really going to help you understand what it's basing its decisions off of when you click on the function. And number one is its position on a bounding volume when you click auto sew. It's really going to recognize things that are connected to the same bounding volume most effectively. So I'll turn the bounding volumes back off. And the second attribute that it's looking at is the proximity of seams very close to each other. So here we can see that the side seams are near each other, and then some other areas have relationships defined also based on the bounding volume and their proximity to other bounding volumes. So this is not based on the 2D space really at all. So I'm going to start from a newly imported DXF file, and the first thing I'm going to do is set symmetry among all of my pattern pieces. So the auto sewing function is located here in the 3D window. And if you left click on this before any of the pieces are arranged, it is going to identify dart and pleat closures and first sew those areas together. Here I have some darts and I'll demo pleats in a second file after this. But you can see that the sewing has been applied to the darts here. So to auto sew the rest of this garment together, it requires arranging this around the avatar. So I'm going to turn on my arrangement points and start placing these pattern pieces at the appropriate locations. So now that all these pieces are placed, I'm going to turn my arrangement points off and I'm just going to hide my avatar. And then next, I'm going to hit the auto sew button. So it's just identified what areas will go together based on their proximity to each other and their placement on an arrangement point or bounding volume. And it actually auto sewed everything together. So I can bring my avatar back and then I'll just set this top to layer 1. I'm going to bring my pants down slightly before I simulate. And then I'll hit spacebar to simulate. So auto sewing will work best on simple shapes. The more complex the patterns become, or the more complex the folding that is required, or any type of construction that is needed, it's going to struggle to sew really complicated things together. So here I'm going to go through a second example. I have the DXF imported into the workspace, and I'm going to start the arranging process. So you can see that this pattern has a lot of seam work happening, and it will help to select them as a group and place them on an arrangement point together as a group. I'm just going to freeze the simulated pant before I simulate my top, and then I'm going to hit auto sew. So it's going to process, and then you can see all the seam work come together. And it works well with seam work like this, where it's very obvious where the sections fit together. And now we have a completed blouse. So here I'm just going to go through some different outcomes based on arrangement points and also show you the error message that will occur if the function fails to sew some sections together. So I'm going to begin a very common type of an arrangement where you might place one piece at a time. So I had this piece selected and I'm going to just place it here. I can move this out a little bit. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the back. I'm going to select that piece, and because of the symmetry, they follow each other. I'll just spread this out a little bit, and then my waistband I will place here, and then I can just move this down some. So here my arrangement appears really good to me, and I'll go ahead and hit auto sew. But this error message pops up that the auto sewing has stopped due to an exceptional case. If I hit OK, nothing has sewn together. There are a lot of cases where this function doesn't work for that area yet. We will definitely improve it. But I do know that if I arrange this in a different method, it will work on some parts. So here I'm going to take all of my pieces and just push them out of the way. And then I'm going to select them as a pair. When I select them as a pair, instead of using the arrangement points on the sides of the body, you can use the arrangement points on the center. I can left click and put that front piece down. You can adjust it slightly if you want to, and then I'll put the back down. So those pieces are placed, and I'll also go ahead and place the waistband. I'll just use the offset to pull that out. Then I'm going to turn the arrangement points off. So the setup looks relatively similar to the one that we had before. Now though, if I hit the auto sew function, it does sew some parts together. The waistband actually sews incorrectly, and that can happen too, so you always need to check the sewing yourself. It's not an artificially intelligent tool where it knows really accurately what is supposed to connect to what like we do, but it can generalize based on the proximity and the arrangement point location. But the rest of the area is sewed together fine, and then you will always have your manual sewing tools available to complete the process. So I mentioned earlier that with pleated or darted areas, you can utilize the auto sewing function without those pieces having been arranged to an arrangement point. I have an example here where I'm going to show you how I can do that on this outfit that's mostly completed, but the complex sewing of the pleats has not been finished. So my whole outfit is arranged and simulated, and these pleated pieces are still in their 2D flat state in the 3D window. One really important aspect for this function to work on pleats is that the pleats are already set up with their internal lines and angles assigned. These patterns were made using our pleat tool, but you can definitely do this with patterns that are imported with pleats already built in. You just have to go through the process of putting the markings there. We have some pleat function tools that will help you set this up. But that's kind of key for the auto sewing to see the pleats and see where to sew together. So now I will hit auto sewing. And this window pops up because it does detect some areas that it was unable to finish sewing, like the seams here. But if I hit OK, you can see that it's actually sewn these pleated areas together, here and here. It also has sewn areas at the bottom that for my design I don't want, so I'm going to just select them and delete them. I'm going to quickly strengthen my pieces, and I'll just simulate so you can see them come together. So here we see those pieces pleat up, and they're all connected and closed at the end. Now I can utilize my manual sewing tools to really just finish the in-between areas. So I'm going to go through here and attach the whole front panel, and then I'll also attach the back panel as well. You don't have to necessarily let these start simulating. I just did that to demo that they have actually attached. And now we have our pleats completed with a lot less sewing. So I'm going to go through one last example of a jacket that is relatively complex. There are some extra pattern pieces I have deactivated, but the collar and the sleeves and all the side panels are arranged. I will hit the auto sewing feature, and it is going to sew the majority of those pattern pieces together. It just left the vent areas unsewn and the front closure unfinished. Now I'll just have to finish the styling and some of the construction details. So we do encourage you to test auto sewing on varying complications of patterns, and the feature will definitely improve as releases continue. And that concludes the auto sewing demo. Now we're going to review the updates to baselines and internal lines. First, I'm going to turn on monochrome surface so I can have a better view of my pattern markings. So if I zoom in, the first update is that a locked baseline will display in a slightly dotted or dashed manner. So I can right-click in the 2D background and select Unlock All Baselines. And you can see that that line then becomes more solid and defined, letting me know that it has been unlocked. Now I'm going to point out the first internal line update. With Edit Pattern, you can now select partial areas of an internal shape and copy and paste that to another part of your pattern. Previously, you would have to break corners apart to copy selective areas. And so this will eliminate the need for that and make it easier to copy any area that you want. And the same applies to baselines. You can select just a portion of a closed baseline shape and copy and paste that out. Also an added function to baselines, if you right-click on a baseline with your Edit Pattern tool, you will now find Convert to Internal Line. So you can also change these to internals directly with the Edit Pattern tool. Now I'm going to show the addition of Extend, Trim, and Add Point to Internal Line. If you right-click on an internal point or line, and there is another internal line in front of it, you now have the option to extend to an internal line as well as a pattern outline. And the same goes for Extend, Trim, and Add Point. So when it comes to baselines, you have the same functionality, but you can only currently extend to the internal or to pattern outlines. So you don't have the option to extend a baseline to another baseline. So there's another change in regards to how internal lines might edit. When it comes to editing parts of your pattern with the pleat tool or with the slash and spread tool. So I'm going to go ahead and add a few pleats to my pattern and confirm OK. And you can see that the internal lines and the baselines have been split apart where the pleat intersected them. And the same is also true for the fullness point tool. So here I'll spread open this pattern piece, and my baseline and my internal line are nicely split exactly at that location. So one thing I just want to point out where this functionality does not exist is in the fullness line tool. So here I'm going to demonstrate adjusting some fullness throughout this pattern. And in that case, the internal lines and the baselines don't change with the edit. So I just wanted to point out that that is not built into the second version of the fullness tool. So that concludes the internal and baseline updates. Next, we're going to go through the remainder of the 2D updates. First, I'm going to show an update to the dart tool. So here in the back of this skirt, I have a location where I'd like to add a dart. I'm going to begin by using the Edit Pattern tool and right-clicking on a segment point and choosing Add Dart. Then I can enter the total dart width and the finished dart length before hitting OK to place that dart. Now you will have the option to shape the dart while you are initially creating it. So you can adjust the line you see to blend and hit Enter to complete the action. And then the dart will be blended neatly at the area where it has been placed. Another simple addition that I'm going to show next is related to having a symmetric pattern. Now, if you select a segment in the property editor, it's going to show you the 2D line length, and we've added the symmetric line length. So that shows the total of both sides. So next I'm going to show you an update to the precision movement options that are built into moving a segment point. So here at the neckline, I am going to edit my neckline segment point, but first I just want to show you that this neckline has some curve points on it. If you simply move while you are holding Control or Shift to move along an axis, the curve points are going to move with you. But if you hold the letter D down on your keyboard, CLO is going to hold those curve points in place and restrict them from moving. So first you want to be aware of that when you start editing so you can control how the line is changing. And the actual addition is, if you right click, now you will have the option for finished length. So when you right click, the moving distance dialog will now show line 1 and line 2. So you can see that the neckline curve is what's highlighted and line 1 is selected. If I want to change to the adjacent line, I am going to select line 2, and then you will see that that shoulder line is what becomes highlighted. Then at the very bottom, I can type in the finished length. So here I'm going to type in an even 130 millimeters, and then you will see that end adjusting. And then you can hit OK to confirm the edit. So now I'm going to move to the back neckline and repeat that action to adjust the back shoulder to also measure 130 millimeters. And then I'll just manually correct the back neckline. So the last detail I want to show you is in regards to showing pattern measurements. If you hit Shift plus the letter Z on your keyboard, all the measurements on the patterns will appear. Then if you move into print layout mode and arrange your pattern pieces here, you will also see the measurements showing. So now you can save those images with your exact line lengths showing. And that concludes this set of 2D updates. So now let's have a look at what has improved with the POM tool. First, let's have a review of the existing functionality. This is what has been possible up until now. I've already marked out a straight line. You can start at one point and move to another, and you can move across pattern pieces and double click to end. In this version, we have added the option to also draw curve points as you're moving. So if you hold the Control key and left click, you will be placing a curved point down, similar to when you draw with an internal line. And you can see the list populates here where you can rename it. This renaming ability has also been added to the POM number, You could not rename this before. So now you can change it to a code or a number that you prefer. So the next part of the improvement has been added into the trace tool. So you can now select one or multiple segments and right click with the trace tool and you will find trace as point of measure. And then this will also be added into the POM list. So this same functionality for the trace tool will work on an internal line or also a baseline. And you can see those POMs added here. So that concludes the updates to point of measure. Next, I'm going to go through the improved grading compatibility. I currently have a pattern that's not graded. I'm going to go through the process of adding a size group. I'm going to make sure the base size I want to start with is checked, and then I'm going to assign the size group to the selected pattern. Then I can start applying grading. The actual update is the addition of curve points reading and holding grading information. So now there's an edit curve grading tool, and when you switch to this, you will be able to see all your curve points. So I'm going to begin by selecting the entire segment, and at the bottom right corner I can see the measurement set for my arrow key movement. I'm going to go ahead and increase this to 0.125, which is 1/8 of an inch. Then I can reselect this segment and start using the arrow keys on my keyboard to develop the grading. And now I can go adjust the grade of any of these curve points individually. So the option to control the grade from every single point on your pattern is going to give you some really precise control over grading. So I'm going to switch to monochrome surface and then isolate my 2D window. And then I'll move around grading individual areas of my pattern. So first I'll apply a general grade to the entire area. Then I can go in and refine the grading of the in-between curve points as well. This is definitely a sped up version, but the actual process took less than 5 minutes to complete. So now with this addition to the grading points, you will be able to control your grading very precisely and accurately. And that concludes the grading update. So here I'm going to talk about a new file type for load all render properties. It's called a .zvrp file. And what this is going to include is the image video property settings, the light property settings, the camera property settings, and the render property settings. It will also include custom views if they are in the file. So when you choose File Save, it will save all of these rendering properties plus the custom views. And if you open up a different file and go to File Open, Render Properties is going to open all of those same settings and those custom snapshot views into your new project file. So this is really great for standardizing render properties across a lot of different people or images. And I'm going to run through a brief demo of that. I have my render window open and I have some custom snapshots that I've taken. If I click on the image video properties, I've set this to a custom size. I have a blue background and a texture image. If I click on my lighting settings, I have turned the dome light off and I have 2 additional lights that I've set up. I've changed my render engine to GPU CUDA and I've set a really specific noise threshold and render time. And I've adjusted the scene puckering intensity as well. So now I'm going to go to File, Save as, Render Properties. And here you can see it's a .zvrp file, and I'm going to save this into a location. I'm going to close out of this file, hit File New. So here I'm opening up another file that I've made at another time, and I have no custom views happening. I'll go to my render window. So this has some different render settings from another point in time, but it has no custom views, and it has different sides. It has no custom views. It has different lighting, and it has different settings for the most part. Now I can go to File, Open Render Properties, and I can choose that render property file from the previous file, and all the other lighting and render property settings that I had applied. Now I'm going to go over the skin shader property that's been added to the material types that you can apply to your avatar textures. So here I have my render window open. I've selected all of the textures that are making up this avatar, and I've actually set a render preview of the current settings without the skin shader applied. So here the avatar is selected and it just says fabric matte, which is the default. And if you take a note, it's most noticeable by the ear area, that switching to the skin shader property creates the look of translucency in the way that light might penetrate thinner parts of the body like the ear or the small parts of the nostrils. The settings are already configured to create a good natural outcome. And an important number that you don't want to really mess with is the mix number. This is set at 1. That's kind of the highest that this goes. And if you change this to 0, you won't actually get any of the effect. So lowering this number of mix, now if you look at the ear again, you can see that the translucency is gone. Lowering the mix number is going to kind of cancel out all of these settings. The density is the next setting that affects all of these groups of shallow, medium, and deep color settings that share similar options. We have color, color map, weight, and radius under shallow, and we have the same under medium and the same under deep. You see this repetition of color, color map, weight, radius. So these two properties of mix and density affect all of these parameters together, and the density scale is also something that does that. One way to describe the density scale is that it kind of affects what is considered the size or the scale of the object in comparison to the light that's hitting it or maybe penetrating it. So increasing this number will actually also reduce the amount of translucency, because it's almost like you're making the object bigger and thicker and in turn denser. So when the light hits it, it can't penetrate very far, and so it gets lost and almost not even seen. The density scale is at a default number of 0.7. If I raise this up, I'm going to go to 2, then I'll move to 7. The translucency is almost gone. Now if I lower this down to 0.3, the light is actually penetrating that area a lot more, and it looks very bright. A color map is something that might come with some avatars that are made in DAZ with really intricate textures and color maps. The weight number will define how dominant this color is amongst the entire group. 1 is the highest this can go. So if the number is decreased, you are reducing the presence of that color. But again, these settings can really be left alone. They're a little bit complicated for people who are not familiar with subsurface scattering in general. So that's why we've set them to already be at a parameter that you really shouldn't have to mess with that much. Just select your avatar textures and change the type to skin before rendering. So here's just a side-by-side comparison of avatars without the material type applied versus avatars with the skin material type applied. You can really concentrate on the ear to look for that change, but overall you can see the improvement of the look of the avatar. Next, I'm going to go over an addition to the render properties of seam puckering intensity. Here I have a jacket set up that has a lot of puckering applied to it that you can see in the 3D window. I'm going to refresh my render window so we can see this preview, and I'm going to click on Render Properties. Here, a section has been added called Global Map, and we have Seam Puckering Intensity. The default number is 2, and that is what the preview window is showing right now. I'm going to increase this number all the way to 5 and refresh my window, and you will see the change in the puckering intensity apply to the entire garment. So this is going to affect all of the puckering that is applied to your garment, even if the puckering is made up of different puckering types. And then the opposite would be taking this number down to 0, which will cause the puckering to be hidden completely. Now I'm going to bring up a comparison image showing two renders, comparing the default number of 2 to an adjusted number of 5. And you can really see that difference in the render. So that's it for the addition of seam puckering intensity to the rendering properties. Next, I'm just going to show a simple feature called Show Grid in the rendering window. I'm going to generate a render preview. And here you can turn on Show Grid to give yourself some guidelines in the render window. This is just a visual aid. These lines will not appear on any renders that you create. Next, I'm going to go through the addition of metalness and metalness maps. So I'm going to explain this first on a really basic level. If you select your fabric now, first I want to point out that we now support PBR materials and rendering. So here under material, you will see PBR as the default. And now if you scroll down in the property editor, you will find metalness and metalness map. The metalness toggle can be used without a map, and the roughness amount and reflection intensity will all react with it to increase or decrease the amounts of shine and glossiness that you're seeing. This is really an additional control that you have now. I'm going to bring these settings back to the default of 50, 15, and 0. So now I'm going to select this black and white image and drag it into the metalness map area. And you'll see that image apply. I'm going to increase the metalness percentage back up, and you will see how this map affects the rendering result. Darker areas of your map will be red with high reflection, and then the lighter, whiter areas will be red with less reflection. So you can see that reflective type pattern throughout this fabric now. In this case, the fabric is still set at matte. It's not even changed to metal. If you go a step further and you change the material type to metal, it will then affect the entire texture and kind of overpower your map. So when you're using a black and white image as a metalness map that you want to affect different areas in varying degrees, you may not actually want to turn your type to metal, but keep this at matte. And really what you're going to increase is the amount that the image placed into this area is read as a metalness map. If you leave it at 0, even with the map, you won't see anything. So you have to increase that number to start seeing the effect. And then one last detail is that you also have the option to transform the size of your metalness map independently. So here I can go in and reduce the size, and you'll see the texture change and the render update as well. So that's kind of it for the very basics of the metalness map. So I'm going to begin again, starting with a blank piece of fabric. And I'm just going to quickly demonstrate using the metalness map option with a full set of matching maps. And this is the result that we'll get at the end. So here I'm going to click on my fabric, and I'm going to begin pulling all of my maps into the appropriate area. And I'll also switch the roughness to map here. And then lastly, I'll apply the metalness map. I'm going to shrink this texture down just so we can see it a little more detailed. Then I'm going to adjust my render settings. And then I'm going to increase the metalness map amount. And then here you can see the final output of all of these maps combined with the metalness property increased. Now that I have all the maps applied, I actually am going to test changing my type to metal. And you can see the result. So depending on your texture images and the amount of maps that you have, changing the type to metal can sometimes have a really good effect on your outcome. Next, I want to show another way that you can use a metalness map by pairing the same exact image into the roughness map. So here I have a plain fabric, and I'm going to change my fabric type to first metal. And then in the metalness area, I have this image of a star. The part that is white is what is actually going to show as the metal. With this black and white image, it will read the white areas as very shiny and metal, and the areas in between as matte still. But there is still some reflectiveness to those in-between areas. So you can see here at the top we have some shine, but I can still see the metalness of the star very prominently. If I switch the roughness to map, and then bring that same black and white image into the roughness map area, the black areas are what will then show shine, because roughness maps read darker areas as smoother and therefore allow more reflection intensity to show. If we choose invert, it will invert that black and white image, so the star is then what is black, and that is the part that will show reflection. So now you can see that the stars are reflective, but the areas in between are matte and have no shine to them at all. So see at the very, very top here, we can see this top area has no shine, but the stars do. That is by pairing the same image that you use for metalness with the roughness, and then choosing invert. So what's also new is the ability to use an opacity map. If you select your fabric and look in the property editor, you will find opacity map. You can either use a black and white JPEG or a PNG, which has an alpha channel or the transparency already built in. To use the JPEG, simply drag it into your opacity map area, and the black areas will be read as transparent and the white areas will be visible, and you can leave this on RGB mode. If you want to use the PNG with the alpha channel, you will just have to change the mode to alpha to make it work. So here you can see the updates happening. And that concludes the addition of opacity maps. Next, I'm going to go through the addition of iridescent material type. To demonstrate this, I've set up an outfit and I've brought up my render preview showing the current state of all the fabrics. I'm going to apply the iridescence to the solid blue fabric and also to the print fabric that I have applied to this base fabric. So if I click on my fabric, we can see here that the fabric type is at matte still. Same for the print. If I click on this, it says fabric matte. And if you go to the material type section, you'll find iridescence and in parentheses render only added to the types. So this will only show in the preview render window. It will not show in the 3D window. So left click on that setting and my render window is automatically updating to preview the iridescent type applied. So here you can see the print now has iridescence. I'll select the blue fabric and make that iridescent as well. And now we can see that visual in the render window. So the settings that go along with the iridescent property are a set of colors that you can change to show different highlight types. So here I've changed to yellow, and now you can see this area has some yellow built into it. I'm going to close the color window, and now I'm going to go over to the roughness property. Increasing the roughness will reduce the amount of shine coming off of that fabric. The hue shift will change what colors are dominant or showing most prominently in the iridescent reflection. And then lastly, we have weight. So the more you increase the weight, the more intense the color is going to show. And that's it for the iridescent properties. And here's a render of that finished iridescent fabric. Next, I'm going to go through schematic render. Schematic render is an update to a feature called Show Style Lines that was originally built into the 3D garment display menu, and it's been pulled out and moved here with its own icon and renamed schematic render. So if you left click on this icon, the window is going to transform in this type of sketch-like black and white view, and you can move around your garment and see that it resembles a sketch. So this window is going to appear, and you're going to have several settings to change that all relate to line thickness. So first we have the silhouette outline, so that you can make thicker or thinner. We have the seam line thickness. You can adjust that as well. Any internal markings, you'll see, and you can increase that thickness too, or you can hide them. So here we have a fly marking that I may not need. I can click this icon to hide it. And then we have the top stitch line thickness as well. Then there are two color options. The first is line color, and then garment color is an option as well. And then the last detail we have is the brightness of the shadow. It's a little bit subtle, but you can see it there changing as I toggle up and down. So you can increase the brightness or decrease it. I'm going to return this to black and white for the remainder of the demo. And you can minimize this window and move it out of your way. Last, I'll show what the snapshots will look like when you use schematic render with it. First, I'm going to bring up some custom views that I created. So here I took some snapshots of viewpoints that I would like. And now I'm going to use File, Snapshot, 3D Window, and choose a location to save these. I can click on Multi-View, and it will pull from the custom views that I created, and then I can save this. So once that's saved, then here I'll just show the images that I was able to create with the schematic render and snapshot. If you want to get out of the schematic render view, simply hit this X icon to exit. And that concludes schematic render. Thank you so much for joining us for this portion of the 6.0 webinar. We will have a few more features to showcase, so please subscribe to see more updates.